I also want to say that we are co-hosting this this webinar with a wonderful and dynamic organization, nonprofit organization here in Canada called Evergreen. And if you're not familiar with them, and regardless of whether you're here in Canada or elsewhere, I would really encourage you to visit evergreen.ca. It literally is one of the most dynamic organizations in North America. And thanks, Pam, for moving it forward. They have a great program called Watershed Champions, but they've also been doing lots of work for years in promoting, eco-literacy through active citizenship, with a particular focus on schoolyard greening and community greening, as you can see by the photographs attached to the slide here that Pam's got up in front of us. And so I'm really delighted to be working with Evergreen on this, and they've helped us put together this webinar. And a big shout out to Lisa Fisk, who's joined us this evening from Evergreen, for all of her efforts in this regard. If you're not familiar with Green Teacher, and I know many of you are new, we are a nonprofit magazine that has been publishing the magazine, copies of which you see on the screen right now, for the last 22 years. And it's a place where basically youth educators share their best ideas for educating kids on a wide variety of topics. And in the last 10 years, we've had the pleasure of publishing a number of books. And at the end of this webinar, if you're not yet a subscriber or you haven't purchased any of our books, I'd gently but strongly encourage you to do either of those things, because that's going to enable us to continue offering this free series of webinars into the future. So without further ado, and by the way, as you may, those of you who are at the very beginning, and I know many of you are just joining us in the last couple of moments and will have missed some of this introduction, but we turned on the recording recording button about 5 minutes ago, and this session will be archived, and tomorrow you will get an email from us announcing the archive is available for the next 30 days. And to encourage your friends to have a look at it if you found it worthwhile. And so there's certainly no need to take notes tonight. If you can always revisit and listen to any portion of the archive that you find particularly helpful tonight. So without further ado, let me turn to our esteemed presenter this evening. Pamela Miller is really one of those dynamic educators that one only comes in contact with but a few times in one's work in education. She's a really dynamic educator who's been, I'm sorry, Pam, I have to say this, it's the truth. As many of you know, Green Teacher is based in Toronto, and so it's with great frequency, not huge frequency, but great frequency that I hear about Pamela Miller, and infrequently we have the pleasure of running into each other at conferences and workshops and so on. But she's one of those people that everybody just admires for her incredible enthusiasm, but also the creativity that she has brought to the Toronto District School Board, one of the largest school boards in North America. And she's been involved for many years in one of their more dynamic programs called EcoSchools as an instructional leader. And essentially her work there involves fostering best practices, developing resources, and building collaborative learning networks among teachers and staff to sort of deepen the skill levels of all those people, and as well as their knowledge and approaches to environmental education. She's been a teacher in the classroom. She's worked in their outdoor education schools, and I'm just utterly delighted that she accepted the invitation to present the webinar this evening on but one of her many, many areas of expertise, ecoliteracy through active citizenship. So please join me in a warm welcome to you, Pamela Miller, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Tim. It has been a treat to be invited, and I'm pretty nervous. I hope it won't show. This is my first webinar as well, but this is great to be here. Because of the chat room, I'm thrilled to be able to invite those of you who have joined us to tell us how you've been involved through active citizenship and how you are building ecological literacy, whether it's through that active citizenship or maybe it's activities or other projects. And we'd love to hear what you're doing. I was just actually at 2 schools today, and we're talking about sharing between the elementary school and the high school. And it's amazing how just, these little seeds of what people are doing can be so inspiring for another group of people. So do share. Again, as Tim said, it's in the bottom of our chat box there. Tell us where you're from and how you are connecting with youth through active citizenship. All right, so the webinar today, we're going to focus on first active citizenship, why we think it's so important. Then we're going to look at how to do it. And then we're going to look at some examples that I've seen through my experience working with the Toronto District School Board. And I'm generally going to try and use the word educator, but I do apologize if I use too much teacher talk, because I'm often working with teachers. So although it's raining here where I am in Toronto, I'd like to think that summer is coming and that warm weather is not too far away. But I am reminded of last summer, and we had a wonderful flash flood, record-breaking flood in fact, and it really did some infrastructure damage in our local neighborhoods. As you are probably aware, that as in Toronto, wasn't the only location where floods were happening. This is the Philippines, Alberta, and Central Europe also experienced record-breaking floods. On the reverse side, New Mexico, Southwest China, and Namibia and Angola experienced record-setting droughts. And unfortunately, the droughts are happening still, and they're much longer term than our floods are. I don't think we're strangers to extreme weather. And you would almost say, I remember David Suzuki saying that it's climate chaos that we're in. This is our new reality. It's not climate change anymore, it's climate chaos. And again, in the chat box, feel free to add, how you've been impacted by extreme weather and how that's affected people's ways of thinking. Because really, to me, that's what ecological literacy is about, is changing our way of thinking. So this is our new reality, and the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change talks about that, yes, our climates, our atmospheres are getting warmer, our oceans are warmer, the snow ice has diminished, and of course greenhouse gases have increased. So how do the kids that we work with, that are in front of us every day, how do they cope with this new reality? How are they able to bounce back and develop resilience from climate chaos? And is this really the kind of future that we want for them? I mean, this is their reality right now, but does it have to be? I'm inspired by a story that some of you may know about. William Kimkwamba is from Malawi, and at the time of this story, he was around 12 years old. There was a drought at the time, and he looked around at a situation, and obviously a very challenging situation, and said, this is not where I want to be. This is the future that I don't want. And so at the age of 12, he headed down to the library, picked up a book on power sources, and built a windmill. And this windmill created electricity for a light bulb, and I believe a radio for his home. And being inspired by that success, and the community gathered around him, and in fact the global community connected with William, they have now dug a well and built a solar-powered pump that gives clean water not only to his family, but to the whole community. And what an inspiration. Here's someone that, again, is experiencing challenges, but jumps right in and does something that changes his entire future and the future of his community. David Orr talks about we don't need, more successful people. We need people like William, people of courage that will make the world a better place, that will work for the common good, that will work for not only social justice, but environmental, environmental problems, overcoming them. And I think he's right. And if education doesn't teach us how to get involved with these issues, then really what are we doing? So I'd like to present to you environmental action projects. And I think they come under the name of many different things. I've read about them called service projects, action projects, social projects. But ultimately, what they are is students learning or youth learning and working together to positively change an issue. So this is where they're taking ownership of it and they're moving it forward to improve conditions, not only for themselves, but for all life. So we're looking at, the biodiversity for all life and for all peoples. What I like about action projects is that they are an amazing antidote to what David Sobel calls ecophobia. That when you get climate change and you hear all the problems, you can get mired and get, oh my gosh, overwhelmed by all of this, and you get anxious. But when you get involved with an action project, it is the best antidote to fear and hopelessness and all that anxiety. It's great. It teaches us how to be active citizens. And a lot of the schools in Toronto want to develop in their kids that agency, that they can see, that the students themselves can see them as agents of change, that they can bring about a positive change and make difference. I love this bulletin board. It's actually not from our area, but here we have, at the beginning of September, we are making a difference at King Edward, and at the end of the year, look at all the photos of people making a difference and all the action projects that they got involved with. Another thing that action projects do, as a teacher in the classroom, we don't want to add anything more to that overpacked schedule and the curriculum that's so full that you can't squeeze anything more in there. And what I found when I was doing action projects is that they covered so much of the content, and then better is they taught the skills in a way that was authentic. And so I could teach much of my curricula through action projects. And you can see just a list of subject areas that you can integrate action projects into. Another part about action projects is, of course, students working together, and you can see this group of kids having way too much fun doing a waste audit. I can't imagine, but here we are, teamwork and leadership and having to vote, and so that's democracy. And if one's better than the other in another skill, we can build up that skill and then build up their other skill and develop them differentially. And of course, it's citizenship because they're actively involved and there's ownership to their work. Of course, action projects are real-world learning. We have Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup. I mean, what was more real than that? Going outside and making a difference for the habitats of the benthic and macroinvertebrates that live along the water, or working with kids and their parents and in the community, or collecting things for people that don't have the same kinds of privileges and things that we have. It's concrete as well. I'm such a concrete learner. I can't imagine not doing something with my hands, and so I love that connection. As an educator, our role is multifaceted. When we're engaging students in environmental actions and action projects, we're not only a facilitator, helping students and guiding them along the way to figure out where they want to go. Sometimes we're directly teaching them the skills that they need. We're a coach, we're encouraging them, we're a cheerleader, and then of course we're a project manager, depending on the age, making sure all the pieces come together, making sure that we haven't left anything out, that we've got everything that we're moving forward to. So as an educator, you can see yourself in many different roles as you help your students. So how do you start? There's lots of ways to do that. Many of the resources really start with finding a focus. There's so many things to do, so find a focus that's going to work for you and your students. And there's a couple of things to think about when you're thinking about your focus. I think it's the curriculum connections and opportunities like the riverbank. So if you have, if you are doing, let's say, grade 7 ecosystems and you're in Ontario, then you can use the ecosystems as the riverbank, and inside you have so many opportunities to work with the ecosystems concept and developing your action project. But that keeps you sort of connected with your curriculum. Or we had an opportunity where a local organization, Planet in Focus, was offering a film festival. Well, again, that's sort of our riverbank, and so we capitalized on that film festival and said, let's do it. And so our action projects now are related around film. Of course, student interests are key. You want to connect to what they're emotionally connected with. So what's their heart saying? What are they passionate about? And of course, if you have teenagers, you know that the social impact is huge. If their friends aren't engaged in it, they don't want to be. So, you know, how are they engaging with other members of their peer group? And if that peer group is involved in Me to We, maybe we do a Me to We greening or Free the Children, but it's related to environment and social justice. And of course, there might be issues that impact the student's quality of life right where you're at. And so that might be very important. We've had a lot of loss of our ash trees through the emerald ash borer, and so as a result, we've lost shade. And that's an issue that affects the students directly, because without shade and they're playing outside, that's going to impact them through the UVA rays. And so that might be something they're concerned about, that they want that shade back. A third area you want to think about is real-world connections. Sometimes our students aren't able to imagine what's possible, so I offer them a chance to get connected to the real world before we actually brainstorm to what kind of projects are possible. I read in a recent book about a teacher in the Appalachian area that took their students on a field trip to see mountaintop coal mining, and what an impact that made. And I can just imagine standing there looking at the destruction and the loss of the mountain and the loss of, you know, all the biodiversity and the impact on streams, and I would just be on fire to do something. And so going out and looking at what their world looks like. Sometimes we're just having a neighborhood walk every week, a Wednesday walk, and we're taking a look at our neighborhood and seeing how it's changing, and our observation skills increase, and so we can kind of see some of the challenges that are happening in our neighborhood, and then make an action project around that particular topic. The second step, so the first step is you pick your focus. You want to spend time building your understanding, becoming informed about the issue, because one action project, you don't want to jump into an action project and realize that it's either been done and it maybe isn't the best approach, or you're stepping on people's toes. So you do your research about what's going on. So the first thing is research from also multiple or systems perspectives. So in our community, we have many, many cultures, and everyone comes with a different perspective. And so you want to include all of that. So not only First Nations, Métis, Inuit perspective, or what you might call a Native American perspective or an Indigenous perspective, but other cultural perspectives from people that are new to your community. You also have economic perspectives, historical, scientific, etc. So taking a look at all the multifaceted ways that people look at that particular issue. It will fascinate you and inspire you to connect in many different ways. As the educator, you're, depending again on the age of the youth that you're working with, you're facilitating that research. You know, finding the right sites or getting them connected with speakers and real people, or, you know, telling them where to look or what to look for. The next step in being informed is building connections. So there might be some informal or formal connections that you could make. In this picture, it's a school connected to a food growing PAC garden group. And so that was a great connection because PAC provided all the labor and all the stuff during the summer when the garden need to be watered and cared for, and the students provided, again, lots of enthusiasm and lots of time in the garden. And so that partnership was really key for the success of that action project. You want to find those, who's out there and make relationships with them. And then, of course, what about your local area? Spend time being connected to your nature that's there and get to know the biodiversity, getting to know your spaces, and how you can use that to your advantage as you move forward. Also collect or take advantage of collecting real-world data. So find out if this is an issue in your community by collecting the data on site. So here's an example of some students outside collecting idling data. Are the cars actually idling? And how long are they idling? And how many cars are idling? And is this a problem in our community, or is it not? Is it just something we think about? So there's lots of opportunities here for surveys and tallies and math and collecting anecdotes from other folks and how they think about the issue, inquiry, experiments, first-hand research, even waste audits can be exciting when you're looking at how are we doing. You also need to teach the actual action strategies. So I taught grade 5 for a while, and when I moved down to grade 3, I realized there was a lot more pre-teaching that I would have to do. How can they write a letter? Well, what is a letter, and what are the parts? And how can we present in a way that will engage people? And how can we persuade people without feeling like, or without them feeling like they're manipulated? So these are skills, again, depending on the age group, you may have to teach directly or just capitalize on their previous knowledge. And also take stock. You may have some amazing students that are songwriters or drama, that love to do things through the arts or do through science or math. What kinds of skills do they bring? And so that's one area you're taking stock. What about your school community? Are there parents involved, community members that could come alongside? Are there funds available? Are there grants available? And in terms of organizations, are there partnerships? The other thing as you're taking stock is those challenges. What can you anticipate might be a real problem? A real easy one is, we're gone in the summer. How are we going to keep these things alive? And so you want to anticipate those challenges as you move forward on your action project. Next step, so now we've found our inspiration, we've become informed about the issue, now we're ready to make a plan. And with good planning, you want to think about the end in mind. How will we know we got there? How will we know we are successful? We want to be creative. We want to use all our creative juices to think of something that will inspire us too. Who wants to do a plan that nobody wants to do? You make it fun, integrate it into the curriculum. And of course, build in time to organize and carry out the plan. Sometimes, even when I'm planning a workshop, I plan it to about what I think is right, and then I cut it in half. And then I might even cut it in half again. And that's actually probably what's doable. And then I break that down into what we can do. Who's going to be involved? Who's your target audience? Can you recruit supporters, past students, past folks that you've been engaged with? What roles can you give? Can you assign responsibilities so everybody feels that they've got an important role to play in the action project? And of course, check in often. Check how people are doing. Are they happy? Are they feel content? Is there an area of expertise that they're not being able to use that you can bring out in further actions along the way? And then, of course, as you're making your plan, build on those student strengths. Teach the skills as you need, and then commit to a block of time. I like to give 6 weeks for good action projects in the classroom, and that includes, again, learning all about it. So it's almost like a 6-week unit with the action project being interspersed throughout it and then culminating at the end of that 6 weeks. Of course, it probably takes 8 weeks, but yeah, 6 weeks is good. As you're ready to take action, then you can delegate the tasks, you can track the progress, And I forgot to put up your document all the way from the beginning because you want to know how you did and look back on it in the next slide about reflection. But if we don't document right from the beginning, then there's not much to reflect on. Be flexible because you never know. It might rain on that day that you want to go outside, or things like your technology may not work. And so be flexible in your plans as you go forward. And the most important thing, obviously that's celebration. And as you're celebrating, you're reflecting on what worked, what didn't, how success can build more success, and share that story. There's lots of places to share. We use, obviously, technology to share. Newspapers love to have great stories. And so the more you share, the more validated the students become. And it tells them that they are important. And yes, they have made a difference. So now we can get to what to do. So we talked about why it's important. We've talked about how to do it. And now we want to go forward with why. And this book by Daniel Goldman talks about how educators can nurture and cultivate ecological literacy. And I'm going to use his 5 ways of connecting and building ecological literacy as my framework. And actually, I'm going to really speak to the first 4. So the first one he recommends, and I think this is really key for all action projects. If you're first starting out, or if you have young learners, this is a great place to go. So developing empathy for all forms of life. And a key guiding question to think about it is, what can we do with our students that will nurture direct connection? Get them touching, feeling, holding. And then, of course, not only with all life and all nature, but people. What actions can we do that will build relationships with different cultures and people who have different perspectives? Things are never black and white. We think, oh, don't cut down trees, but what about the foresters? How are they coping with the changes too? And can we understand their perspective? So great ways to get involved. I see some of you are involved in school gardens. I love that. We're just actually taking a group of grade 2 students out down to a bigger sort of natural area, and so getting them connected with their gardens. Animal care or animal identification, doing field guides for the schoolyard. Anything to do with animals and plants and living things is a great place to start for young learners. This is an example where a school made pledges to protect and steward an area. So each of those log circles has a name, and they're going to take care of that garden. And on the sidebar here it says, "Don't be mean, be green." On the asphalt, they've actually painted some of their pledges too. Bullying pledges as well as environmental pledges, and that's related to their character program that's going on. So again, empathy can be through character ed as well. And of course, we talked about building with different cultures. This is a fabulous story about Sharon Thunderbird, who came and worked with one of the schools in our area, and they built the first ever large medicine wheel with the group of students with rocks, and they named the rocks, and they worked through drumming ceremonies, through songs, and that group of students has an incredible relationship now with Shannon and the elders of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. So it's, again, a good example of how to connect with other cultures. Daniel Goldman says number 2 is take a look at what we're doing in everyday life and embrace sustainability in our regular action. So, what you do every day, can we make it a community practice? Can we do things for the common good? Some great examples are restoring habitat. So here's a springtime, they've cleaned the area, they're building, adding some more trees to a washed out, overused area. They're increasing biodiversity to combat some of the invasive species we've had. Here we've got waste audits going on, we have energy, lights off campaign, and with the folks in the colored bright vest, that's a walking school bus. So they're working on reducing their impact by not having their parents drop them off every day to school. By walking together as a group and keeping safe, they're getting to school more sustainably. Another way we can enter into action projects is by making the invisible visible. And this is really important as our students get older. They get more connected with the injustices or the problems. And so what areas or issues are in your neighborhood or community that are hidden, that we want to bring out and we want to tell people about? And how can we increase the knowledge and empathy and action for these issues? So a couple of examples. This is a high school group that did a big campaign on water bottles. And they collected all the water bottles for a week, and they showed the students just in 1 week, this is how many we're throwing out. Let's do something about this. And talk about consumerism and the impacts, the multi-impacts of water bottles. You see Phone Apes is another big campaign around our area that might be in your area, recycling cell phones so that the coltan is recycled and not destroying gorilla habitats. Do-it-yourself summits. So it's not necessarily making the invisible visible, but making things more visible in terms of things you can do yourself. And so it's not hidden away in a factory someplace. You can do these things. And so by revealing, again, the true cost of consumerism, or by looking at things you can do yourself, reducing your impact that way. Another way of making the invisible visible are through active campaigns. Sometimes it's lobbying. This is an example of the mega quarry lobbying so that people knew about it and they could input their public voice. We talked about the film festival. So of course, anything that's a challenge on your school, in your school area, or something that you're struggling with, make it into a film campaign. It's amazing how all of a sudden it's in everybody's faces. And one of my favorites is up here in the right-hand corner, buried rivers. So have cities buried rivers in your area, and can you make them visible again? Find out where they daylight, find out when they go underneath, and trace your watershed and make that issue of sustainability and water issues something that's on the forefront of people's minds. Citizen science is another way of making the invisible visible. So what's going on? Frog watch, worm watch. Here it's looking at the benthic or macroinvertebrates. How healthy is our stream? Can we figure it out by looking at the biodiversity? SLAP, looking at the number of birds that are killed by big buildings. We have 1 million birds in Toronto that are killed every year because of the big buildings. Can we bring that to awareness so that we can put reflection or turn lights off so the birds aren't killed? The last area that I want to talk about in terms of what's been happening is in areas of policy change. And this happens more in the high schools, although it does happen in some in the middle schools, where students actually go after the system and figure out ways that they can make it positive for everyone. So 2 ways that that's been happening. This is a water bottle filling station. This particular school realized that water bottles are an issue, but if they didn't do something like provide a water bottle filling station, then people would continue to bring water bottles. So not only did they fundraise for this, but what I thought was quite impressive is they lobbied the administration and the school so that every student in grade 9 that goes at the beginning of the school gets a stainless steel water bottle. And so they start off their year with a water bottle. And here in the school are water bottle filling stations. So now they are empowered to have something to change the system. Some grade 8 students at another school couldn't believe how much packaging was in these plastic clamshells that are down at the bottom here. And so they wrote letter upon letter upon letter to the municipality saying, oh my gosh, please have them put into our recycling stream. This is ridiculous. And it was interesting that at the same time the municipal government was working on this and invited the students to come to be part of the city council. And so a decision was made by the city council with support from the students to put clamshells, or these plastic clamshells, into the recycling stream. And so these students are so empowered. They feel so, they're powerful. They've made a difference in the city politics. And how exciting is that? Mentoring is another way that you can really change systems. So this is a group from Halifax, and they started a play called Mind Shift, but they turned it into a mentoring opportunity. And so it's almost like Pay It Forward, where they teach you the play, and then you teach others. And you can showcase the play, it can be part of a conference, or you can mentor another group. So they mentored a group in Toronto, and then that group has mentored a middle school in Toronto. And through the play, they're learning about sustainability and what's happening to our planet. And they are just on fire with this play and how it's changing different communities one at a time. And it builds a relationship that is long-lasting. So it's not just a one-off. It really changes systems and changes the way people think. So I think you can see there is from A to Z of the types of action citizenship that you can get involved with. You know, from building that empathy to doing different practices in everyday life to changing system priorities. Ultimately, we need to know that everything we do makes an impact. And I think by engaging your students in ecoliteracy through these action projects, you're making one heck of an impact and will really start changing the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we do. So the resources that I used for this talk, I found also on the web, and so I put them here. The Ontario Stewardship Guide is available from Ontario Schools, or EcoSchools. And what I like about this guide is it starts out with, again, how to do it, but then the end part of the guide talks about what to do. And it really gives you easy entry points, even like how to do an ugly sweater campaign for keeping warmer, or how to do a water bottle campaign. The middle one, taking it global, has a number of different action guides. This one in particular is on climate change. Lots of resources there. And the third one is from British Columbia, Leap into Action. And it was the most useful in terms of breaking it down for an educator, what it looks like in the classroom and how to work with the students, even including some activities to get the students engaged from the beginning, looking at case studies to helping the students get involved.
Great, and thank you, Pam. That was amazing. In fact,
so
it is. Let me underline
questions.
that a little bit. You used the phrase a minute ago. Here's an A to Z, collection of opportunities to do project learning that promotes citizenship, highly engaged learning, and so forth. And I think, in truth, I've had the pleasure of presenting now a few dozen webinars, but no one ever has presented so many ideas, packed so many different project ideas into one different webinar. So kudos to you. It's truly, I'm kind of taken aback by how many more good ideas you've added even since our practice session a couple of days ago. I would step back a little bit to you, the participants. You've just, as I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did just a moment ago, and I, like Pam said a moment ago, will invite your questions. But I thought it might be interesting, especially having recognized a few names, and know that many of you are spread out around the world, not just across Canada and the United States. But perhaps in the chat box, before we ask you to put questions, maybe take a moment and tell us very briefly where you're from and what involvement you've had in promoting active citizenship and eco-literacy with young people, whether that's in a classroom, and if so, tell us what age, or inside or outside a classroom, tell us what age, and what, give us a quick example of the kind of work that you've done. And that way we'll make sure that we use this question period to the best advantage for the work that you're doing. So again, chat box, bottom left-hand corner, type into that blank horizontal box and hit enter on your keyboard. And we'll look forward to all enjoying for the next moment or two a sense of who you are and where you're from, and that will guide us through the question period. And while you're typing away, I will also mention one thing I failed to mention at the beginning, which was that when we finish the question period, I'm going to put up a survey and ask your indulgence to take about 90 seconds to fill it out. And those of you that do indulge me in that request will be eligible to win one of 2 free one-year subscriptions to Green Teacher, our nonprofit magazine for youth educators. So let's just see what so great, yeah. So I see a couple people have already started responding. Please add, tell us a little bit about where you're, what involvements you've had in promoting active environmental citizenship, and once you've done that, start thinking about a question you want to ask Pam. As you can get a sense, this woman is a font of, because she works for one of the large, she is a font of great ideas, and you kind of get a sense from, as I was describing earlier, why this woman is regarded as being a boundless source of energy and good ideas. But let's put her to the test with some good questions in a few moments. And once you've told us where you're from and give us a sense of your of what age level you work with and what involvement you've perhaps had already in promoting active citizenship, please think about a question you'd like to ask Pam, and then feel free to ask that in the chat box.
It's great to see so many soup to salad lunches. I'm just so impressed with people who actually can grow things. I'm not very good at that. I may have ideas, but don't ask me to grow lunch.
Great, and we're seeing great responses in the chat box from people from all over the U.S. and Canada, and a special welcome to Sarah from Hong Kong, and Alicia, welcome back from Adelaide, Australia. We're so glad to have you all with us tonight, and so let's start moving on to some of the questions here. I'm seeing most people are working with kids at the elementary level, and sorry, I'm still scrolling through some of these. Lots of people, yes, as Pam said, are working on community gardening. Pam, let me ask
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask the first question while we're waiting for those to be written into the chat box. What do you think is, you gave us a lot of examples of many kinds of projects. What in your mind are some of the barriers that seem to, sometimes it's not the lack of ideas, but people feel, run up against barriers that prevents them from getting going. Any thoughts on some of the barriers that you commonly experience in your work and the teachers face?
Well, and I think it often is like planning a unit in school too. You think what you have in front of you is 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 4 weeks, and all of a sudden all these parachuting things come in. So either you're sick, your kids are sick, it's raining, all of a sudden the time has gone away. So I'm really excited about, or I would spend more of my time planning and breaking it down to doable steps, so that, let's say, because we're talking a lot about gardens, let's say I want to do a food garden, and all of a sudden the time's starting to get away from me. If I break it down into small steps, so we're going to, buy the seeds, and we're going to plant them in the classroom, and we're going to monitor them as they grow. Even if we don't get to our final action, I think my students will still feel really good about what we've done so far. And so it's understanding that the steps need to be doable, but take time to celebrate along the way, so that you're not putting all your eggs into that final basket. Because once you do that, if something changes, you lack the ability to be flexible and it's almost disappointing that you can't do that. And so if you celebrate along the way, or again, break it down into doable steps, and sort of say, yeah, we've done that, and we're tracking our practice. So even if we didn't get to the final steps, we did 8 out of the 10 things we said we would do. And we can feel really good about that. And the students will then still walk away feeling like they are change makers.
Great, and thank you for that. You mentioned at the outset, of course, that you've obviously working for a school district, you mostly work with teachers, and one of the questions that was asked was in the chat box was by a person who really works in more of a neighborhood setting. And any thoughts about how to help teach kids about gardening?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I have worked sort of for nonprofits and sort of summer camps as well. And I think with the gardening and neighborhoods, you're not mired down by all the must-dos, which is wonderful. You must make sure that you have got this and this and this. And I find that it's almost like if you do, they will come. And so, again, thinking about your plan, almost having little centers set up. So over here, we can experiment with digging. And over here, we can experiment with pulling out weeds. And so that we've got sort of small actions as we go around our garden. One of our amazing gardeners, Sunday Harrison, who does that with the kids, almost did that with us as teachers too. And I watched her have a number of different smaller activities to do, so that when it was just seeding time, we were still pulling out weeds or separating garlic bulbs or getting something ready like the winter cloth to put over the garden. So there were still things to do that we felt that were valid and important. So as you're planning for your neighborhood, folks, knowing that because it's such a hands-on activity, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people around one station, maybe a maximum. And so by having, okay, so who wants to dig? Let's put the diggers over here. And who wants to, experiment with putting seeds in rows? Put them here. And who wants to, maybe do some plucking of those little carrots so that we can make room for bigger carrots. And think of them in small actions seems to be something that Sunday has taught us. I'll keep thinking, but that's the first thing that came to mind.
Well, that's a pretty good answer to start just off the top there to start with. And Sunday Harrison is certainly one of those very inspired innovators in school and community gardening. So she's a good place to, I'm glad she sprung to mind. Sarah's from Hong Kong is asking a question that's really universal when she says, Pam, what have you found to be good strategies in building allies with other teachers and getting them on board with projects? Dynamic teachers can certainly motivate their own students, and if they have an environmental club, they can motivate people in individuals from other parts of the school. But really being able to do a whole school approach, much the kind of work the way that you do with EcoSchools, really relies on getting those other allies and getting them on board. Any ideas for Sarah on that point?
Mm-hmm. And probably from doing it the wrong way and then experimenting with the right way. So the wrong way is definitely, I'm going to say manipulation and, putting their arms behind their back and, you must do this. That's for sure the wrong way. What I found is if I could find out what their skills were. So we had an action project on a creek behind our school. And the teacher that taught the same grade as I did not like the outdoors at all. And here I am. I would love the outdoors. Give it to me in as many ways as you can. So I found out what she was interested in, and we made a swap. So I will take her kids out and do the outdoor portion, the cleaning up, the surveying of the stream. And she really liked the microscope work. So we would bring back samples, and then they would do all the microscope work. And she just loved that sort of the classroom control, the safety of the classroom, but also she was excellent in teaching the kids how to use something like a microscope and those skills of drawing and recording. And so by finding out what she was good in and what I was good in, then it didn't mean that she had to take her kids into areas of her non-comfort zone or in my areas of non-expertise, but we could swap those skills. Another way that we found, again, with volunteers is treat them really nicely. Food, food, food. Chocolate, chocolate, chocolate. Always works. But another thing is committing them to do a small piece of the project. So let's say our caretaker in our school is, well, in fact, he's a really good photographer. And so I could ask him to photograph, on this day for 15 minutes. And that still helps me, but we're starting to build that relationship together. And, or another person, our secretary, office administrator, loved playing around with Adobe, Photoshop, and making flyers. So I found that out, and she says, yeah, nobody asked me. And I'm like, oh my God. So then she would do sort of the advertisement. But I kept the activity small. You don't want to say to them, can you be part of my eco team, and it's a 5-year commitment. It's more like, can you make this one flyer for us, and I'll write the copy and whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, that's something I would love to do. So keep it tangible, doable, small, and have a beginning and end so that they know what they can commit to. Because the worst thing you can do is say, okay, can you do this, and then do this, and do this. It's kind of like washing dishes, and then somebody brings like a whole new tray of dishes just when you think you're done. So you definitely want to make it a small, doable amount. And then what ends up happening is you find that you're building those relationships with those teachers, and the next project, they may try something more or something different. And they say, that was a lot of fun. When's your next one? So always positive, always, treating my, with staff, with love and food, and then making sure that it's a small request of them.
Great, and what a fabulous set of guidelines for engaging others in all of this. That's terrific. Jennifer French, one of my favorite people in Kelowna, BC, and a big long-time champion of environmental education and working on so many levels, who's with us tonight, is one of several who, by the way, have contributed great comments, and I would encourage all of you, as I've been doing, to scroll through some of the comments and suggestions, just as I suspected many of you on this webinar that have a lot of skills already and are already doing some pretty amazing things. And if you haven't flipped through the chat box to see what your fellow participants are already up to, please do that. But back to Jennifer, her first point was that she finds that one of the best ways to engage, one of the great activities to engage kids in eco-literacy pursuits is eco-art. And do you have examples, Pam, of things you've seen that have been particularly effective, or what do you think about that idea in general?
Oh, yeah, Jennifer, that's a woman after my own heart. I love eco-art. And I think eco-art is so powerful because you can start very small and you can make a message that's both creative and fun and engaging. A great friend of Tim's and mine is Hilary Inwood, who does a lot of eco-art. And even things like the painting on the asphalt messages is an example of how they can build eco-art, to a mural. She showed ways that we can actually write letters inside of a leaf by using a pinprick and then hanging those leaves that had once fallen off the tree back onto the tree, and then the tree sort of putting our messages into the wind. And there's a blog from the UK that I've seen that I'm sure you're probably familiar with. It's from Julie, and I've forgotten her last name right now, but it's, Get Me Outside, I'm a Teacher. And she just showcased some different eco-art, things like mandalas, or hanging ribbons from the trees as wishes is a Gaelic or Scottish tradition. Even the Yellowfish Road, or the Yellowfish stencils could be considered an art project. Sorry, Tim, I kind of forgot your question, but I was thinking, you know, where do we start with eco art, or what? Sorry, remind me back to the initial question.
Well, no, you've already really answered it. Which is that that it's important, and I think that's the first and best message. But secondly, you know, some examples of eco art that you've been particularly impressed with, and if you want to add to that, that's great. And you'll see that a few people have already added some wonderful suggestions of their own about eco art. And Lisa, shout out to you for your lovely URL for where people can learn a lot more about eco art, and Tamara for your suggestion about yarn bombing, knitting scarves to put around trees and bike racks. What a great idea!
Sorry to interrupt.
Any more ideas, Pam? Does that help?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that the knit bombing, we have a grade 5 teacher who's just about to retire, and I'm so sad. She engaged her grade 5 students into knit bombing, and the boys were the best. They just loved the knitting, and they would come in at recess and at lunch for more yarn, and they took it to the a different level. It was just fabulous. An organization that just also came to mind uses art to teach sustainability through design, and what they do is they get the students to walk around their neighborhood and envision what their neighborhood could be. And so then they work with architects and then make models that are to scale on how to make a more sustainable, safe, preferred neighborhood. And it's an amazing project that is done here, and I would love to see replicate everywhere.
Thank you. Yes, I would too. And I was just, you know, you reminded me. Once a week, Pam, I, or my assistant will get on our bicycles from the Green Teacher office and take a whole bunch of packages to a depot a couple of miles from us in the west end of Toronto that are packages of books and magazines on their way to the U.S. And we pass a school that's built on top of one of the buried streams in Toronto. And one of the eco art projects that the students did to help their local community appreciate the watershed that they live on top of, they did all kinds of wonderful paintings that were then put onto ceramic fish and other aquatic creatures, and then they were in the shape of those creatures, I should have said, and then they mounted them on the chain link fence on their schoolyard. And so they not only took an ugly chain link fence and turned it into a gigantic group art project, but unlike putting up a plaque that says you're now walking on top of what is now a buried stream, instead they did it through art and imagination. They've captivated their local community, who are far more enthralled and engaged in thinking about how to uncover this buried stream, simply because of an eco art project that was student led. So there's many ways of doing this, and you've certainly given us several good examples, and we continue to get more examples from Deborah and others in BC that in the chat box that and I see LL from Victoria talking about invasive ivy and blackberry pole that use those materials as hoops and wove them together into hoops. That I've heard of that. I've just myself editing a book called Teaching About Invasive Species, and it was a British Columbia educator who sent us the idea about working with kids in Stanley Park in Vancouver, the most famous park in the city, to do similar work of pulling invasive vines and weaving them into wreaths for sale, and as one of the strategies for helping to educate kids about invasive species. And I love what you're doing in Victoria, LL, creating Dreamcatcher-like art pieces that are hung in schools. That's really brilliant. Pam, I can't thank you enough for this. This has been a fantastic session, and a big thanks to all of you who are with us. As mentioned, I'm going to pull up the survey at the moment. It doesn't mean you can't still ask questions of Pam, but I do want to take us to this survey so that those of you who have to leave us shortly will have a chance to fill it out. And I'm just typing in the URL here. It'll just take me a moment. Well, that didn't work out too well. Let me just see where I went wrong. Yes, I see where I went wrong. Let me just change that to a 3. There we go. So again, folks, if you wouldn't mind taking 90 seconds, and those of you that do that fill out the survey, and indulge me in this request, will be eligible, as I mentioned earlier, to win one of 2 free digital subscriptions to Green Teacher. And again, if you have other questions for Pam that you want to ask or other comments to make, please feel free to do so. And we'll otherwise look forward to seeing you at another webinar.
And Tamara, just to let you know, I can't see you fill out the survey, so don't worry. I can only see my own page, so I think that's true for everyone.
That's right. Yes, everybody is essentially when you start filling out the survey, you're doing so in privacy. So not to worry that other people are stepping in. But your candid comments about what you liked and maybe what could have been better, both of those things are much appreciated. And again, thank you, Pam. This has been really incredible. I knew that this would be a rich presentation, and I had a sense of it through the practice session, but you've just added so much more to this session, and I really liked what you did in sort of adding additional slides to that. I think that just improved the pacing of your earlier presentation, and it just made it all that much richer for all of us.
I mean, I have to give credit to all the folks that are doing the action projects, because just as one action project can inspire the person who did it to move on to do great things, a project can inspire so many of us. And so every time I go into schools and see these projects, it's just, you just walk away shaking your head going, this is fabulous, and you just want to jump in yourself. So credit to those of you who are involved in doing some of these things, because it's so great to see. And you are really inspiring the next generation to try out active citizenship and not be afraid of it, and to make a difference in the small to even policy changes.
Great. Well, thank you, Pam. I'm just going to take a pause here and we'll turn off the